Welcome. There's still music playing. Welcome to OLC 40, Term 1A, Class 11. Today we're working on assignment number 13, the last little bit of it, and then also assignment 14, plus correlative conjunctions. All right, welcome. I am Jillian Percy. If you are trying to reach me, you can call the studio, 1-800-465-7144. You can also email me at jillian.percy@nnec.on.ca. You can also reach out to me on Facebook, capital G, capital P, ERCY, space, capital W, AHSA. Previous classes are stored at YouTube at gpercywasa, which I'll show you in a minute. If you are ahead of where we are right now in the course, take a look at term 2B or 2A, and there will be previous classes there to help you out. Any assignments, please send to studentwork@nnec.on.ca. Please make sure that every single one includes your full name, the course name, the assignment number and name, and label if it is the rough or the good draft of a writing assignment if the assignment asks for it. Not all of them do, but a lot of the writing assignments do. Okay. Here we go. This is what the YouTube channel looks like. It's very, very simple. Not the home button, but if you look at the playlist button, it will pull up all the videos organized by playlist. This is the most current one. It's the OLC 40 Term 1A. If you are a student of mine and you're working on one of my other courses, English 4E, I haven't done yet this year, but it still exists from last year, and you're welcome to take a look at that and use that if that's helpful to you. Okay, learning goals. By the end of today's class and assignments, we should be able to write complete and correct sentences, including how to use correlative conjunctions. I think we get to this today. It's kind of a long class today. Use appropriate strategies to edit written work to achieve accuracy in the use of conventions, including the requirements of grammar, usage, spelling, and punctuation. I go into a lot of detail on this today so that I don't have to every assignment that we do this. And then read materials to find details that are directly stated in the text, as well as make inferences based on words and actions. Okay, so we didn't 100% finish all the work for assignment 13. We were just beginning to go through that checklist, and we'd done a lot of the big details for like the revising of that news report, but we hadn't looked at kind of the smaller, more finicky stuff, which is kind of considered in the editing. Okay, so we started, this is what I've got here. We didn't quite get finished when we were talking about incomplete sentences. An incomplete sentence is basically only telling half the story. It's missing usually one of two parts. Either they've forgotten the subject or they've forgotten the predicate. If the subject is left off, it can be really confusing to understand who is doing the action. So for example, left the meeting angry. Who left the meeting angry? They haven't told me. Right in the front there should be a who or a what telling me what happened at that meeting. Well, not what happened, but who left the meeting. This is probably the most common incomplete sentence. Sometimes, however, the predicate might get left off. Remember, the predicate is the verb and all the words connected to the verb. It can make it tricky to understand what's actually happening. This sometimes will happen if a subject is kind of complicated rather than a simple subject, or sometimes the writer will use an introductory phrase that contained a verb, and so they thought they were okay. So for example, if I said, the day that I got hurt, so the subject is day here, and it's being described by the phrase that I got hurt. But that's not actually a separate verb telling us the point of the sentence, unless that's what you were trying to tell us. And then you could say the day, I don't know, the day I got hurt that day. You'd have to kind of change the sentence around for that to be a proper sentence that way. Falling trees hit the ground as my brother Dave. What did he do? Now, here's the one. Falling trees, falling is can be a verb, but in this case, falling is actually kind of describing the trees. It's acting as an adjective. I still don't know what Brother Dave is doing, and he's the main topic of the sentence the way it's written. So when you're doing an incomplete sentence, you're kind of leaving your reader a bit confused. Okay. Now, the other time people will sometimes create sentence fragments is when they're trying to create emphasis. And there's two main reasons for this, I think. A, we see it a lot in novels. Remember that novels are kind of written for entertainment, so they break the rules sometimes. The other thing is we use this a lot when we are writing on like Messenger and Facebook and stuff like that. But that isn't the formal writing that we're doing here. So in our formal writing, we generally should avoid this kind of sentence fragment. So if it says, I never should have gone there, period, not with him. Now, I do know what you mean in this case, but not with him is not actually a complete sentence. There actually isn't a subject or a verb in there. I could phrase it differently to try and make it part of the main sentence if I want to. I could say, I never should have gone there, comma, at least not with him. I could also use a dash if I want to, because dash can be used for emphasis, right? I never should have gone there, dash, not with him. You could also use an ellipse to set it off. Remember, an ellipse is the dot, dot, dot. Here, it sounds like you kind of were pausing to think about it. I never should have gone there, dot, dot, dot. Not with him. And you're thinking about it. That ellipse kind of shows like unfinished business, but also the idea of time passing. All right. The other time I see people using incomplete sentences incorrectly is when they're trying to create examples. So for example, we love to go out in the bush and do outdoor stuff, period, such as fishing, canoeing, having campfires, hunting, and things like that. Okay. The examples here, it's two separate sentences, but the second one, such as, isn't really, it isn't a verb, it isn't a subject. It kind of is just kind of a partial sentence here. But I could join it into the first sentence. One way I could do that is I could put a colon at the end of the first sentence. See, like I've got here, those two little dots. We love to go out in the bush and do outdoor stuff, such as, colon, and then I would give my list. You can also rewrite that second sentence and give it example. I could say, some examples, now that's my subject, are, there's my verb, and then I would list my examples. Either way is fine, but this right now, I will mark that wrong, or what you might see next to it, I might write this, INC, and that means it's incomplete, okay? So here is an example. We've talked about this before, but just as a repeat, every sentence has to have three things: a subject, a predicate, and it must express a complete thought. If the sentence is leaving you hanging, then it hasn't expressed a complete thought. Fixing these are generally really simple. All you have to do is add the part that's missing. So if I have a sentence that says went to the store, what's wrong? Well, it's missing a subject. I don't know who went to the store. So that's easy to fix, add a subject. And I could add whatever, whatever actually happened, whatever I want. My mom went to the store. Now I've given it a subject. The old red truck. Well, here I've got a subject, but it's missing the predicate. I don't know what the truck is doing. So it's easy to fix. I just add a predicate. The old red truck filled up with gas. After I go. Now this one is tricky because it's got a subject, the I, and it's got a verb, go, but it's considered an incomplete thought because after I go implies that something's going to happen at that point, but we don't know what because they haven't finished the sentence. So I need to add a main clause to create a complete thought. So after I go, please do the dishes. Okay, so now it's a complete sentence. All right, so moving on. Now we're going to be talking about the editing. Remember, editing is where you're kind of doing the fussy stuff. You're cleaning up grammar, the usage, the spelling, and the punctuation. We generally refer to those as conventions, right? Okay, so there is an acronym people sometimes use to help them remember the main editing strategies or kind of areas, and that is cups. And the C stands for capitalization, the U stands for usage, the P stands for punctuation, and the S stands for spelling. So generally, if I'm like marking work, I would go through each one of those one by one, and I would check to see that they've got them, right? Same thing if I'm doing my own work, right? I would revise by looking for all the capitals, looking for the usage errors. It's just kind of the easiest way. Now, we've already covered most of this yesterday's class. However, we skipped over number 9 because it's really part of editing. We just finished up talking about number 11. And then 12 is the punctuation or the capitalization. And I added spelling errors. I think I had this originally and then it got left off. Sometimes people get super focused on spelling and I didn't want people to get too focused on it. It's really only a very small part of any mark. And so, like, even if you spelled every single word wrong, as long as I can tell what you're saying, it's not going to cause you to fail an assignment. Okay. I know sometimes people kind of worry about that one more than everything else, but I'm really looking for your ideas. Having said that, sometimes spelling can get in the way. Sometimes you spelled a completely different word than you meant, and that can be confusing. So, this is the part that we're going to be looking at right now. Okay. First of all, capitalization. Now, again, we've talked about this that kind of in the last 10 to 15 years, the move in most schools was not to teach grammar. It was kind of felt that people were just going to pick it up naturally, which I definitely don't think is the case. So some of these you may not have seen before. Okay, so a lot of it is common sense. Basically, the 3 biggest ones that people struggle with is at the beginning of a name. Everyone's name gets a capital letter. So J for Jill, T for Tom, M for Marlene, right? At the beginning of a sentence. It's just kind of a little clue. Hey, a sentence is beginning. I know we don't do that with syllabics, right? It's a little bit different. But with Roman orthography, we do. And then if I'm talking about the word I, like as in the person, I, we never use the little I, we always use the big one because again, it's referring to a person. And then it goes, I'm listing all these and we'll talk about them, but basically, whenever something has an official name, that official name gets a capital to show it's the official name. So the names of months and days, like November or Monday, titles like Mr., Mrs., Ms., or Doctor, the name of a street, the name of a business, titles for books, movies, and games, the names of a place, towns, cities, reservations, provinces, states, countries, continents, the names of a body of water like the Atlantic Ocean or the Detroit River. For monuments or buildings that have a specific name, the CN Tower, Massey Hall, Victoria Inn. The names of airports, train station, or bus stations, if they have a name, they often do, but they don't always. The name of a park. Again, not every single park has a name, but a lot of them do, and in which case you would put a capital letter for the name of that park. Also, the names of natural landmarks like mountains, canyons, valleys, deserts. You don't have to do this if you're just referring to the stream and it's going by. But if you're wanting people to know, okay, I specifically want you to know I'm talking about Detroit River or my brain is going dead on rivers here, Mississippi River, and you want people to picture that exact river, then you need to make sure you use a capital letter for the name of that river. Okay. Number 9 is the one we skipped over before, and usage. Usage is kind of a funny phrase. It just basically means any kind of grammar error where how they've used it is a little bit different than how it's normally used, okay? Everybody makes usage errors from time to time. For one reason, things change over time. Sometimes what's common in one era is a little bit different. I consistently find errors in my own work, especially if it was work I rushed through or if I was distracted. So don't be bothered if you find usage errors in your work. It just means that now you know enough to catch them. One common mistake that I look for specifically is subject-verb agreement errors. And this is where the subject is plural, but we used it with a singular verb, or the subject is singular, but we used a plural verb. This is the most commonly it happens with when we're using conjugations of the verb to be. Am, are, is, or was, and were. A lot of people don't realize sometimes that these are specific to being singular or plural. So we're going to kind of talk about that. So these pronouns are singular, you, he, she, or it. So if I was using those pronouns, I would have to use is for the present tense, right? Because it's singular, or was for the past tense. He is cold. He is sad. It was cold. And if I had any like noun, like the dog was cold, the clown was sad, I would treat it the same way, okay? The pronoun I is also singular. It sometimes will get a different verb for be, which is the am. Most times it would just use, oh, yeah, we'll just leave it with that. These pronouns are plural. We, they, and sometimes you. You can be singular or it can be plural. And for present tense, we would use are, like we are eating. And for past tense, we would use were. They were sleeping. And any plural nouns would be treated the same way, like the girls were sleeping. The class was eating. Class, that sounds like one. The football players were eating, okay, that kind of thing. So this is one of those ones where you got to be kind of careful, okay? We will come back and talk about that some more another day though, but here we go. Here are a few examples of incorrect sentences, like people is mean sometimes. Well, people is kind of a plural, so I wouldn't use is. I would change it by using are. People are mean sometimes. I is getting behind on my homework. Is doesn't get used with I. We always use am instead. He are the principal. Okay, so he is singular, but are is for plurals. So I would put he is the principal. They was late to the party. They is plural, but was is only used for singular. So I would say they were late to the party. She were his favorite sister. Well, here is the opposite. She is singular, so I should be using the singular version of were, which is was. He run fast in the race. Here I would add an S. I don't know if we talked this. He runs fast in the race. For some strange reason in English, the singular version, we always add an S to the verb. The plural version of the verbs, we never do. That's probably one of the trickiest things about English. We likes going swimming. The subject is plural. So the verb should be, the proper way is we don't have the S. We like going swimming. I don't know why. It seems like it would be easier to have no S on the singular and yes S for the plural, but that's just not how it's done in English. Okay, basic punctuation. Generally, the main one I see problems with is actually the period, which makes sense. It's the one we use most often. If you're giving information or a command, we use a period. If you're showing strong emotions, we use an exclamation point. If you're asking a question, we use a question mark. Sometimes people aren't sure or don't realize that they're asking a question in their writing. If you're using words like who, what, when, why, where, or how, you're probably asking a question like, how is the work going? There are some other really common question words that if they're the first word in the sentence, it's a good chance you're asking a question as well. Things like are, is, am, was, were, do, did, have, like are you coming to? Were you at the party? Every now and again, a question sentence might start with a contraction like weren't or didn't or haven't, like haven't you already given him $20? So those are some examples of things to do. The big thing with periods is people actually kind of aren't using them enough. They're using commas a lot of times when they should be using periods, which we're definitely going to talk about a little bit more later. So commas, I think, are one of the trickiest things to use because they have so many different places that we use them. First of all, we separate the words in a date with them, like Monday, comma, August 15th, comma, 2023. We also use them if we're separating words in a list. Please buy eggs, flour, milk, and bread. It could be actions in a list, like we're going to go swimming, riding, and hunting, and we would still use commas between those two. To separate the words in an address, I live at 34 Front Street, comma, Sioux Lookout, comma, Ontario. To separate adjectives, I saw a beautiful old big house. Now you can see this is kind of because it's a little bit like a list, right? But it's a different kind of list. Now, here's the one we talked about a lot this week. To separate two simple sentences or main clauses when you're creating a compound sentence, but it must have the conjunction. I love to ride bikes, comma, and I love to swim. It's got to have that conjunction between them. If I don't have that, it's an incorrect sentence, okay? I can also use it when I have introductory phrases or materials that come before the main part of the sentence. Yesterday, comma, I went to the store. Oh, and here we have a complex sentence. I don't know why I put this as something else. Sorry. Complex sentence. That's when we have that, we talked about this yesterday, a dependent sentence that can't stand on its own, hooked up to a independent sentence, which can stand on its own. If I wanted to buy the car, that's my dependent clause. It's connected to the independent clause, I needed more money. And I put a comma between the two to help show you that there's two different clauses there. That one's a little bit tricky. Okay. Punctuation, quotation marks. We're going to talk about this because we do talk about this in a huge detail in Unit 3, but we kind of need to talk about it a little bit here. We use quotation marks to quote the exact words someone has said. You always put beginning marks before they start to talk and then ending marks after they talk. The beginning ones, I don't know if you can see that, they look a little bit like a 66, and then the ending marks look a little bit like a 99. Often we add what's been called a tag, and the tag tells us who is talking and how they're talking. And then we put a comma after the tag before we put the quotation. So here we go. Here's my tag, John said. John is the person, said is how they're talking, comma, a little bit of a space, my quotation marks, then his exact words. Now I've got my period, and then I got my quotation marks. If that's the complete end of the sentence, I put the period inside the quotes, and it kind of stands for what he's saying and the entire sentence as a whole. But sometimes I put the tag at the end of the sentence. Okay, and in that case, there's a little bit of a trick to it. If it's a period, I don't put it there because it confuses people. They think the whole sentence is over. Instead, I change that period to a comma, and I save the period for the entire end of the sentence. It still goes inside the quotes. If I had a question mark or an exclamation point, we would leave those. We don't change those to a comma because they have a special meaning. These are two kind of more place where we use commas that's a little bit tricky. Okay. All right, two more things, and we've talked about this earlier. I forget which class, I want to say like 3 or 4. Dashes are when you can be used to define a word, to introduce a list, to provide further information, and to provide emphasis. A dash is just like a little line in the middle, okay? Colons are used. Again, we use those to show dialogue, to emphasize something, to introduce a list or tabbed material, to clarify books or time. And that's the 2 dots that stand on top of each other like that. Oh, wait, sorry, wrong one. There we go. And then semicolons. Semicolons only really have 2 main uses. I can use them to join 2 independent clauses, 2 sentences that are related in meaning. I can also use them to separate items in a list that are much longer phrases or already use a comma and need something to help clarify. Okay, they're a bit tricky to use, so be very cautious when you're using them. Okay, number 13 is spelling. Now, I'm totally aware most people are using software programs to check your spelling mistakes. Here's the thing, not all spelling programs will catch every type of spelling mistake. If you used a word and you spelled that word correctly, but it's not the word you wanted to use, it's not going to catch that. It can't tell meaning that way. So for example, if I wanted to write, he was a leader that influenced others, but I accidentally wrote, he was a leader that inflamed others, the computer is not going to tell you that's wrong, but they have two completely different meanings. Influenced means I'm having an effect on other people to do certain actions. Inflamed would mean I'm making them angry. So those mean very different things, but they do look a little bit alike at the beginning. And if you are using certain kinds of computers, it might give you both of those as suggestions and you'd have to choose the right one. So that's to be cautious about. The other really common place where there can be a mistake is if you're using what's called a homophone. A homophone is a word that sounds exactly the same as another word, but it has a different spelling and a different meaning. So I'm putting here the three most common times I see this. And the word to has three different meanings and three different spellings. If it has the one O, it means location, like I'm going to the store. If it's TWO, it means the number two. And if it's TOO, it means also, like I want to go to. And then there's three versions of the word there. If it's spelled THERE, that's location, like my brother's over there. I always picture somebody pointing for that one. Their THEIR is possessive, like that's their car, it's their house. And then their THEY apostrophe RE is a contraction. It's a short form of the two words they and are, and there's a little apostrophe showing that the A has been dropped. That's also true for its and its. IT apostrophe S is a contraction for it is, and ITS with no apostrophe is a possessive. You'd see this a lot if you were talking about animals or buildings, like its windows were dirty, or its bowl was not full of food. Okay, these are the three most common kind of confusions I see in people's writing. All right, if you're still working on assignment 13, the very last stage of that is publicizing it. In the real world, publication could mean many things. It would just mean that you've shared it. It could be a poster you've put up, or you've mailed off your resume, or sent a friend your text message, or a poem or short story was printed in a magazine, or maybe an advertisement you designed is now on Facebook. But for our purposes, publication essentially happens once you've shared it with me. At that point, the piece is kind of out of your hands and you're not really making a lot of changes to it. Having said that, if you were very unhappy with an assignment mark and you wanted to revise it and resend it in, that's fine. I do take that. Okay. We'll see if I've got time for this. Okay. I can write complete and correct sentences using correlative conjunctions. These are a special kind of conjunction. I feel like I'm a little bit worried about missing. All right, we're going to cover them kind of quick, I guess. We talked about three different types of conjunctions. Coordinating joins two independent clauses. Subordinating joins one dependent clause to an independent clause. And then the last one is correlative, which is what we're going to talk about today. I'm not going to worry about that or that. Let me see here. Yep, we did those already. Okay, so correlative conjunctions are used to show how two words or two phrases are related to each other within a sentence, and they're always used in pairs. We could either hike through the woods or fish on the lake this afternoon. The moment you see the word either, it's a clue that there's going to be a choice word later on, okay? Whether you bike or drive to work, you'll need to show your parking pass. Whether is another one that it gives you a clue. There's going to be a choice. You're going to need to look for that second choice. Not only did my boyfriend buy me a beautiful necklace, but he also, okay, the but also is another pair that go together. Here is a list of some really common correlative conjunctions: as many, and then as much, and as to as, barely and when, both, and, either or, hardly when, if then, just as and so, neither nor, no sooner than, not only, but also, not, but, rather than, scarcely when, so that, such that, the and the, that was tricky, what with and, whether or. When you see the little ellipse, the dot, 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 it means that there would be words there, right? They wouldn't be right next to each other. There'd be the first one plus a phrase, and then the second one plus another phrase. So if comma, if dot, 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 then means if you are hungry still, then let's go get some pizza. So here are some examples in a sentence. Not only is the rent due today, but also the car insurance needs to be paid. You can either go back to school or start looking for work. No sooner had he asked where everybody was than the doorbell rang. He had scarcely walked into the house after work when his boss called again. I would rather go out to dinner with you than just watch a movie. Just as you would like people to treat you well, so should you treat others with respect. He had barely got the driveway shoveled when my mother arrived for her visit. Okay. If you use a pair of correlative conjunctions to join two independent clauses, you need to use a comma before the second part of the conjunction. If you get your homework done early, comma, then we will have time to go see a movie, period. Okay, so quick review of these three main types of conjunctions: coordinating, subordinating, and correlative. Sorry, I have trouble with that word. I can neither confirm nor deny that statement. What type of conjunction is that? Neither nor. That would mean it's correlative. I'm just going to dump a color in there to show it. I have to go shopping, but my check hasn't come yet. Okay, so but is one of the coordinating conjunctions. Even if I wanted to, I can't come to the game tonight. Even if is a subordinate conjunction. When you see it, it's joining two unequal clauses together. He had scarcely opened his eyes in the morning when the kids were in the room demanding to go to the park. Scarcely and when is a correlative conjunction. After you finish the dishes, let's go for a walk. So that would be a subordinating, because after you finish the dishes, can't stand on its own. It demands another part to the sentence. Okay. Okay, quick note. Some people still have last year's version of the course, and assignments 14 and 15 for last year are completely different than this year's course. A lot of the assignments are similar, but number 14 and number 15 are not. They are 100% different. Now, you can still hand in those completed assignments if that's what you have. Feel free, but please contact me for this year's version if you do, because there are some major differences and you are going to want this year's version, okay? All right, so for the next section, we would be looking at chapter 2. I don't have time to read the whole thing together with you, but it basically talks about Jimmy going back to school and how that goes. And there's a bunch of conversation between him and the principal. And then he, let's see, has a conversation with his mom and his uncle. And that's kind of, I think it's the end of the chapter. It's not a very long chapter. Okay, so there's some questions for number 14. But before we start, I want to talk about, remember when we talk about RAP as an acronym to help us create an answer? And the RAP stands for R is restate, A is for answer, P is for prove. So for, this isn't this particular question. So for a question, it might look like this. I think the intended audience is, and here they've restated the question. I'd give my answer, and then I would prove it. I would give my reasons why. Because blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so after the word is because is where you would give your reasons. So anytime it's asking for like why, you want to use the word because and explain your reasons. Okay, so this part is worth 12 marks. The very first question is, why did Jimmy keep quiet when the principal was questioning him at the beginning of chapter 2? Give evidence from the book. So don't just guess, don't just rely on your memory, check the book and see, did the author or the character give a specific reason for that action? Remember to put it in a complete sentence like we just discussed. Okay, number 2. Jimmy had several different types of emotions after he saw Teresa. What did he feel and why did he feel that way? This one is worth 4 marks. Name 2 emotions and provide a reason for feeling each emotion. So he felt this emotion because this was going on. He also felt this other emotion because this other thing was going on. Again, check what the book actually states about his feelings and why he feels that way. Okay, number 3. How do you think Peter feels about Jimmy being home? Give at least one reason from the book. Okay, how do you think? That's a tricky part. We're going to talk about that. When a question uses the phrase, how do you think? It means that they want your opinion on the issue, and it may not be stated directly in the text. It may not say, Peter said, hey, I'm so glad you're home. You may have to look at what the character does and says and make an inference. An inference is like a reasonable conclusion about what a character might be feeling. So here's an example. This is not one of our questions. This is an example from a different part. How does Jimmy's Gookum feel about having him home? Give at least 2 details from the text to support your answer. Jimmy's Gookum is glad to have him home. When she first sees him, she ruffles up his hair and says, Jimmy, I'm so glad to see you. She also made his favorite foods to welcome him home, moose stew and blueberry pie. Now, I also wrote here page 6 and page 6. The reason I did that is to show that I got this from a specific spot in the book. I didn't just make it up, okay? This is a good habit to get into. As you go on with English, it becomes a requirement rather than just a suggestion, okay? Number 14. Yep, we talked about that. Number 5. Oh, okay, hang on, there's a tricky part here. When I was first writing this, I was revising this last year, and I was looking for 2 kind of specific things I was trying to think about. I wanted spots where people could have more chance to work on making those inferences. So my original number 5 says this. At the end of chapter 2, Gary says to Jimmy, we could really do something together. What do you think Gary means when he says this? What evidence from the book makes you say that? And again, give at least 2 pieces of evidence or details. So that's because I wasn't sure if people really knew what Gary was meaning, right? I want you to kind of think about that. If that's the copy that you have, it's fine to answer that. Later on this beginning of this year, I looked at it and realized I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about how to do a summary. So I changed it into a summary question. If this is the version you've got, that's great. Either one is totally acceptable. Here, I'm just asking you to write a short summary of the overall events in chapter 2. Be sure to include all the major events that happen in the novel, but don't include every single detail, right? Like your summary shouldn't be as long as the original chapter. Okay. So right now you can choose either one. Okay. Quick talk about summarizing. We've been discussing putting an overall opening sentence to your paragraph, but you don't need to do that when you're summarizing a chapter. You can just list the important events in the sequence they happened. Remember to include characters' motivations or reasons for starting events and emotional reactions to events. So like if somebody started a gigantic fight because somebody called him a name and he felt humiliated, you would want to include so-and-so felt humiliated, so they started a fight. So you don't want to just list the actions without explaining why things are happening. Having said that, dialogue, you probably don't need to list dialogue. You can usually just restate it rather than quoting it word for word. The setting, depending on what you're writing about, Sometimes the setting is not really that important. It can often be very briefly stated, like, at the house, so and so said, that kind of thing. You don't have to go into a lot of detail about it, even if the book went into a lot of detail about it. You want to hit all the important points, but not retell every single little detail. You're looking for the big stuff, right? Um, Here is, for example, a sample summary of Cinderella. And I wanted to point out it was actually really hard to make this as short as it is because I wanted to retell. It's hard to shorten it. It's hard deciding, hey, what's the most important part? Now, some people will over summarize. They'll be like, oh, Cinderella's about a girl that goes to a dance and loses her shoe, and then later on she gets married. Okay, that's a little too short. We need a few more details in there, okay? So here's an example. After her father dies, a young girl lives with her stepmother and stepsisters who treat her horribly and make her do all the chores. The prince of the land announces a ball and invites all the ladies of the land. Everyone is very excited, including Cinderella, who makes her own dress. Her stepsisters destroy her dress so that she can't come to the dance with them as they drive off. A fairy godmother appears and magically creates a dress and carriage for her that will appear at midnight. Cinderella rides to the ball and danced with the prince, who is dazzled by her. When the clock strikes midnight, Cinderella is forced to run away before her dress changes, but leaves a shoe behind. The prince scours the land looking for the princess who fits the shoe and marries Cinderella when he finds her. Now, just looking at this, I realized I kind of left off. I didn't really include people's feelings. And you don't have to add a whole new sentence. You can often just add it as a little descriptive to kind of make sure people understand what's happening, right? I did talk about the young girl is getting treated horribly. Um, I'm going to say a miserable young girl lives with her stepmother. Okay, so I've added a feeling. He invites all the ladies. Everyone is very excited, including Cinderella. Okay, so I've got feelings there. Her stepsisters destroy her jealous stepsisters. How about that? Her jealous stepsisters destroy her dress so she can't come to the dance with them. I'm going to change this a little bit, period. They drive off. How about they gleefully? They gleefully drive off while she cries. Oh, poor Cinderella. So I'm also trying to role model here, right? I wrote this last night, I played with it, but it wasn't perfect. It can always be improved, right? So whenever people are saying, well, I wrote the rough draft and I can't make any improvements, I kind of just don't believe you because you can always make improvements. She is surprised. She is surprised when a fairy godmother appears and magically creates a dress that will disappear at midnight. Happily, Cinderella rides to the ball and danced with, or how about rode to the ball? Now, why am I changing rides to rode? Because I used danced as a past tense here. So this should be past tense as well. They shouldn't have one present tense and one past tense. It doesn't make any sense. Happily, Cinderella rode to the ball and danced with the prince who was dazzled by her, who was dazzled by her. Same thing. I wrote that part in the present tense, but it's past tense. When the clock struck, oh, same thing, problem. When the clock struck midnight, Cinderella was forced to run away before her dress changed, but leaves a shoe behind. The prince scoured the land looking for the princess who fit the shoe and marries Cinderella when he finds her. Probably married when he found her. Okay, so you can see right here, I started off writing the verbs one way and then I think I switched back and forth. So now looking at that, I feel like I need to go back and fix some more, but we don't really have time for me to fix everything. So This is one of those things where when you're writing, when you find mistakes, go back and fix it. Right now, yeah. Yeah, I kind of went back and forth. I like the past tense. I think I probably would go back and make everything as past tense because it's already happened, right? It's not going on right now. It already occurred. She lived with her stepmother who treated her horribly. Why is it saying that? And made her do all the chores. The prince of the land announced a ball, comma, and he invited all the ladies of the land. Everyone was very excited, including Cinderella, who made her own dress. Her jealous stepsisters destroyed her dress so that she couldn't come to the dance with them. They gleefully drove off while she cried. Okay, now it all matches. I want to point out too, why is this saying this is wrong? Oh, it wants terribly? Oh, I like horribly. I'm going to stick with that. I don't know why it wants terribly. Um, that only took me like less than 5 minutes to fix. So fixing your work, revising your work, it doesn't have to take a long time. Okay. You're just looking for places where things are a little bit inaccurate. Remember we talked about subject verb agreement. I don't know if we talked about verb tense agreement, but that's where it should be the same. If it's written in present tense, it should all be present. If it's written in future tense, all future. If it's written in past tense, which is probably the most common way, it should all stay in the past tense. So that's a quick way to fix this. Okay, we started a little tiny bit early today, and I am going to end a little tiny bit early as well. If you are out there in Radioland, Michelle and I are going to be over at hostel number 2. If you want to come over and talk to us and sign up for WASA and finish off high school, we would be happy to meet you. And we're going to be over there in about 10-15 minutes. And I look forward to talking to people. Thank you so much. And I will talk to everybody else on Monday.